Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us. See participants coming in. That's great. Give you a couple seconds there with the music to get your audio worked out and get settled in. And here we are. So let's go ahead and just get it started. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. Today, we are talking all about these new releases that we've got coming, and whom better than Kirk Stromberg, product manager, to speak about that. All right, let's get going here. So we are going to cover a lot of stuff today and then open it up at the end for Q&A. So please stay tuned for that. The questions panel is at the bottom of your screen. You can open that up and just type in your questions at any time so we can address those. I'll try to man the slides and the questions simultaneously as Kirk talks about iPhone 12 Pro LiDAR support, capture on Android, supported 360 cameras, and one of my favorites, backing up scan jobs. So very, very excited to learn about that. It's going to be great. And with that, Kirk, thanks again for joining us once again at Shop Talk.
Thanks, Amir. Glad to be here. Glad to see everybody virtually. And yes, I know that topic is one of your favorites, Amir. You've done some awesome assistance and webinar and articles for that topic. So let's jump right into it. And if we go to the next slide. So I think most folks are probably aware we released an update to iOS Capture on the App Store last month that supports the LiDAR that is there we go. It supports LiDAR that's in the iPhone 12 Pro and the Pro Max, and as well as the iPad Pro 2020 that was released at the earlier part of last year. And so these are devices that have active depth sensors on them. And so for users that are familiar with Matterport for iPhone, using your iPhone or your iPad to scan a space, the difference here is that instead of us synthesizing the data for the complete view, we now have an active depth sensor on those devices. And so you can get a more accurate representation of the space. And that tends to lead to a lot better performance in terms of aligning scan to scan. You'll see fewer errors, and the fidelity of the model is better. So Capture 411 in the iOS App Store is out right now. And we'll go through a little screenshot in the next part. All the other devices that don't have LiDAR continue to operate just as they were before with Matterport for iPhone. And Cortex AI synthesizes the depth for that information. Just as normal, we're going to continue to do beta releases. And if anybody wants to stay on or participate in a beta release of Capture, go to matterport.com/beta. For iOS, we use an application called TestFlight, and this is Apple's beta app store, essentially. And so basically what you'll do is you'll install TestFlight, and then you follow a link that will have on matterport.com/beta, and that'll get you into the beta automatically. And you'll be updating your Capture app via the TestFlight app instead of the App Store normally. So just for folks that haven't seen it before, the thing that you will see is very familiar if you've done Matterport for iPhone before. Basically, you're aiming at a dot, you're rotating, and you're trying to rotate around the camera itself to try and minimize parallax. And you hold on that dot and you complete it, and you move to the next dot in the rotation. So the little arrows on the second slide, as you'll see, the field of view for the LiDAR sensor is narrower than the ultra-wide camera. And so we're using the ultra-wide camera to get the best, widest imagery and HDR imagery from the iPhone. The LiDAR field of view is smaller, and you'll see that dot pattern in the second panel. That shows you where the LiDAR sensor is actually covering. Everything outside of that, the Cortex AI will take care of. You continue rotating around. There's one thing that's a little bit different than regular Matterport for iPhone, and that we want to cover that last dot one last time, and that helps us synchronize all the data between the imagery and the depth data. And then you proceed as normal. You go to your next scan location, you continue scanning through the space, and basically it's just business as usual. One thing I will note, it is possible to pan and rotate the device to try and get better LiDAR coverage, but there is a little bit of a risk there in that we want to try and minimize parallax artifacts, and that's where you really want to try and keep the iPhone in exactly the same spot and rotate around that center. So in general, the coverage of the LiDAR sensor in the mid-range is sufficient to get a really good model. So, you can do that, but you do run some risks of some imaging artifacts because we have to stitch all of this together. And in general, you're looking for obviously the best imagery and the best depth data that you can get. I'm looking at a couple Q&A things. I'm going to bop in and just hit one or two of them as they're coming up here. So we have not restated the question is, have we restated the expected precision for the scanning method? Not yet, because we need to go through and see a lot more models, and obviously the accuracy for measurement depends on what you're measuring, where, how many scans are in that sequence of what you're measuring. And so we're working on a revamp of that in terms of like guidance in terms of what you could expect accuracy wise. And it also depends on in what mechanism are you measuring? Do it in workshop and showcase or in, with some other asset. I will plug a lot of Amir's work here on Matterport Academy. That's a site with a whole bunch of awesome videos that explain how to use our products. There's details in terms of getting started and best practices for scanning with Matterport for iPhone. Also note that within Capture and the help, there's a little video that you'll see on first use that reminds you. And one of the key things with Matterport for iPhone to getting a good model is somewhat counterintuitive. Like normal, when all of us do a pano with a phone, we typically rotate around ourselves. And one of the key things with Matterport for iPhone is you really want to try and rotate around the phone. That's a little bit unnatural. So if you have a monopod, or if you want to get a lightweight collapsible monopod, it's a really good reminder, and it helps keep you, it helps you learn how to rotate best and minimize stitching artifacts as you rotate through this. And especially if you're doing a larger job, the monopod definitely helps, just because, you're going through a lot of space and you're doing lots of rotations. As I think I noted before, in general, if you have an iPhone 12 Pro, Pro Max, iPad Pro 12, and you're LiDAR capable, it is better in a higher fidelity, better success rate than if you're doing the regular Matterport for iPhone without LiDAR. Without LiDAR will be faster to rotate because we're not gathering two sets of data at the same time. But in general, when quality matters, you want to be using LiDAR if you can. One question that had come up before is the schematic floor plan and the matter pack available using LiDAR? And the answer, unfortunately, is not yet. We're discussing policy changes, and we know that folks want to be able to use that data, especially for 3D modeling and other purposes. So stand by for more updates on that. One question here is, can I get a LiDAR scan that is more like a complete scan? And that's a really good reminder. Thank you, Matt, for that question. So with Matterport for iPhone, we have two modes, simple and complete. Simple is one rotation around. Complete is two rotations around. So in simple, you're pointing the phone directly, well, mostly horizontal, slightly tilted down, and you're rotating to capture that rotation. In complete, you will do two rotations, one up and one down, and they'll overlap in the middle. And so then you'll end up with much more coverage in terms of the space. You'll see more of the ceiling, more of the floor. Now, as you move scan to scan, scan location to scan location, in general, you're going to be covering those areas from a different scan location. But the question that Matt had is, am I going to basically get a complete scan for LiDAR? And yes, we are looking at that in terms of, adjusting those and making it work for LiDAR. So you should be able to get a complete scan as well. And the reason folks would want to do this is I just get more coverage, right? I get a more complete scan of the space. It is longer, it does take more time, but if that's what you need to do, then we want to make that available for you. Really a question from Kevin, are you able to transition to exterior scanning with the LiDAR in the sun, but the Pro 2 camera cannot? Can you use the Pro 2 indoors and iPhone outdoors? So the answer is yes and yes. So the frequency that the iOS LiDAR devices uses is not as susceptible to the near infrared that the Pro 2 camera is. And so it does generally advertise a range of about 5 meters. In our tests outdoors in full sun, you definitely can scan and get depth data in instances where you could not with the Pro 2. Obviously, if you have a non-LiDAR device, Cortex will synthesize that data for you. So you have multiple options in terms of scanning in the full sun. And just like we do with the other cameras, we support mixed camera modes. So you could be scanning with one camera in a certain area, switch over to a different camera in the same project, the same job. They should be aligning and all work with each other. Two questions here. I know I'm leaving some questions. I want to make sure we're hitting the iPhone LiDAR questions real quick here. So we'll catch a bunch of them at the end, but one of them I want to touch here is one question from Peter is how do you handle with a room with mirrors when you're standing with an iPhone? So yeah, this is a challenge because, right, you are directly involved in the shot there. If you are directly in front of a mirror and there's no way to get slightly off to the side, then, one option is scan through the space and then hide that location afterwards so that you're getting the data, but you don't have a spot where the visitor and the tour would actually land to see you. Obviously, some rooms, if there's a room with a large series of mirrors or a lot of reflective surfaces like windows when it's slightly dark outside, or a mirrored wall, right now we don't have any magic to remove you from the shot. And just the last question here on LiDAR is from Don. Does the app automatically use LiDAR if available? So if you're using, if you have a LiDAR device, when you go into your scan modes, the default is on LiDAR. You can choose to do non-LiDAR, and it uses it by default. And if you choose not to, then you'll go a little bit faster, but you won't have the depth data there. We will catch the rest of the Q&A questions around LiDAR at the end. We're going to go through the rest of our sections real quick, and then we'll wrap around to more Q&A. All right, so switching gears a little bit, let's talk capture on Android. So as folks may or may not know, we've had capture on Android in open beta for a while now. So Android capture has been available in the Play Store for a while. It operates, the betas on Android operate a little bit differently than on the iOS App Store. So basically you go through the Play Store, there's no test flight equivalent, but there's just an open pre-release channel. And so if you search for Matterport on the Play Store now, you'll see it in open beta. And version 1.0 is essentially, right now it's focused on connected cameras. So one of the most requested features, of course, is when will I be able to scan with just my Android phone or my Android tablet? That's coming in our next major version. So, essentially Matterport for Android. But right now we're working with the Pro cameras. So all of the Pro cameras, the Pro 2, Pro 2 Lite, Original Pro, and the 360 cameras. And we'll talk about all 6 360 cameras that we support there. The BLK 360 is not yet supported. Our first priority for the next release is the Matterport for scanning with your device, the smartphone mode. So in terms of what do you need for an Android device to use capture with your connected cameras? So you need to be on Android 8 or above. And note that Google is starting to seed versions of Android 12, the next upcoming major release. We haven't tested with that yet. So if you're on the bleeding edge and you've got one of those developer previews, pretty good chance that it's not going to work right, or there's going to be some kind of an issue. We haven't fully tested that, so stand by. We'll wait till that's getting into a much more public beta realm when we'll make sure we get explicit support for Android 12. Now, here's the key thing. With capture and connected cameras, and even with smartphone capture on iOS, a subtle thing in terms of performance is the amount of RAM in your device. What we're doing here is computationally intensive, and it's larger spaces. It tends to eat up a bunch of RAM in terms of keeping track of all the different scan locations and the imagery and the surfaces and artifacts there. So right now, we've restricted this to devices with 3 gigabytes of RAM or more. That's a lot of devices out there in the Android world right now, but there are a tremendous number of models. And obviously, some of the more affordable models are down in the lower end of that range. And so if for some reason you're going to the Play Store and it says that your device is not supported, that is one of the key reasons why we see people asking, well, why isn't my device supported? And that's one of the key things. We want to make sure that the performance that you're seeing is good. And when you get into the lower RAM devices, things start to get really sluggish. You run into a danger of the operating system killing capture, and we don't want to have that happen. Another thing that's a little bit more subtle is that we're using supported devices that are approved by Google and certified and unrooted. So some of those words may or may not be familiar, but in general, device manufacturers, say like an Amazon Kindle, an Amazon Fire tablet, uses Android, but it's a fork of Android. It's a different version. It's not certified by Google. So right now, we don't run on Amazon Fire tablets. And similarly, very popular devices like the Huawei series, up until last year, we worked on those devices because they had Google services on board and they were certified by Google. But given the situation with the US government and Huawei right now, more recent devices from Huawei, like the P40 Pro, don't have Google services on board. And so right now, capture doesn't work on something like the Huawei P40 Pro. So again, that would be a reason why you might go to the Play Store and you're not seeing it available for your device. The one that's the most subtle and that's the kind of weirdest to figure out as a user, if you go in and you say you can't see capture for your device, is we work on 64-bit architecture devices. This means the most modern CPUs and GPUs. This is not advertised well in the Play Store, and there's some sites that you can go and find the specs there. But if for some reason you think your device should be supported and you're not seeing it or you're having an issue, then you can write to capture-beta at matterport.com, our beta site, and we'll try to investigate that for you. But in general, you should be able to see it in the Play Store, and you go from there. Obviously, we're in the Android Play Store. We're not in other Play Stores yet. Sorry, not in other Android app stores. There's manufacturer app stores. There's a bunch of different app stores in China. It's a little bit more of a complicated world versus the iOS realm. So right now, we're in the major one. For users that are in mainland China, obviously sometimes people will VPN out to get access to stuff like that. But if you're in China proper and not VPNing out, you're not going to have access to that. One exciting thing with Android Capture is that we're localizing the application in a wider set of languages to be more friendly to users in other countries. And so we're expanding to 12 total languages within the app. And this is part of a broader effort at Matterport to try and be more global, more attuned to local conditions and native languages. And you'll see these languages coming to iOS capture soon as well. And so generally we want to try to make sure that your capturing and your viewing experience or your users' or customers' experiences are as native as they possibly can be. So there's a couple differences between Android capture and iOS capture, and they're not really not huge, but one thing that is quite convenient, and this will be coming to iOS capture as well, is the Cortex download is already included in the application when you install it from the Play Store. And so this is for users that are familiar on iOS. If you use a 360 camera or you're converting a Place 360 view to 3D with a Pro camera, or you've used Matterport for iPhone, you know that when you go to do that the very first time, we have an extra download, and we download the Cortex AI engine. And this is the artificial intelligence that helps us convert just visual imagery into 3D depth data. And it's not photogrammetry where you're using a whole bunch of different photos to do that, but it's our trained AI based on the data that we've seen in prior models. So this is more convenient because you can just start scanning with a 360 camera right off the bat. You no longer need an account to try with a 360 camera. And this will come to iOS as well because folks want to try with smartphone capture with Matterport for iPhone without making an account first. And so we're relaxing that requirement, bundling it directly. And luckily, both the Play Store and the iOS App Store are smart enough to recognize that if you are a user on a prior version, you already have the Cortex engine installed, and it is the latest version of the engine, it won't install it again for you. So there's no extra downloads, which is really nice. Do note on the very, very first launch of Capture, we do need to phone home to get a security certificate for that engine. Most people are obviously online when they're installing the app, and most of them launch it right afterwards, so there shouldn't be an issue. But if you happen to see that, that's why. You'll notice that when you're scanning and you're moving from scan location to scan location, if there's an error, you'll see a little bit more detail in the error messages on your display. And we're doing this, so we're reporting more specific, more detailed messages, both in our analytics and also for you. If you have to talk to customer support or you're reporting something with a screenshot, the screenshot will have a little bit more detail than just there was a camera error or something like that. One thing that's a little bit different between the two operating systems is we have a little bit more flexibility on Android to do certain things. So for instance, like when you're about to start your capture job, you can tap on the connecting to a camera and will launch directly within Capture, let you scroll around, find the right camera that you want and connect to it without ever leaving Capture. iOS has security limitations on what developers can call, and so it's a little bit more awkward there where you have to switch over to the settings panel. We're going to talk about exporting and importing scan jobs in a little bit here. Android has an early version of the beta of importing scan jobs that you have archived or exported previously, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. One possible gotcha on Android that we've seen from the beta is that more modern versions of Android are a little bit more aggressive about trying to find an internet connection, which is totally understandable via Wi-Fi. But obviously in our world, we are connecting Wi-Fi to a connected camera, and those cameras don't have Wi-Fi, they don't have an internet connection on them. And so sometimes you will see a pop-up when you connect to that camera, and Android will ask, there's no internet connection, do you want to maintain this connection? If you ignore that, or if you say no, well, if you say no, then Android's going to drop it and go searching for a better connection that has an internet dialed in. If you ignore it, Android may drop it, and then you won't see your connected camera. So just watch for that. This usually is kind of the first thing. It'll remember that you like this camera and you're okay with it not having an internet connection. But that's just a common thing that trips folks up. Steve asked, will the Android capture work on the new TripITech Pro tablet? And I'm not familiar with that tablet. So this is one of the benefits and the challenges of the Android world, is that there are just so many models out there. So I'd say for Steve, the recommendation there is go to the Play Store, search on Matterport, see if you see capture. If you see capture, then in theory, it should have passed all those filters in terms of saying, is it running the latest operating system, above 8 and above? Are you in the right architecture? Is it certified, and so forth? If you don't see it there, then it probably is not passing one of those things. And then obviously, if it is passing, go ahead and download it and give it a try. So we're in open beta now. We expect to be releasing the production version hopefully next week for 1.0. And we're going to continue the same pattern that we do with iOS capture. So we'll have production releases and we'll have beta releases. And so we'll continue the open, the pre-release beta channel releases, and you can stay on that channel and you'll continue to get updates before they migrate over to production. In general, the cycle for folks that haven't experienced this before is, we almost always have an open beta period on any new release, because we want to make sure that, the diversity of users and cameras and things that people are doing out there is very, very rich and complex, and we want to make sure that there's nothing going wrong. And the other key thing is we want to get feedback too. So if there's a new feature, especially with new features, we want to get your thoughts on that. Do you like the way that we're doing it? Do you not like it? Do you have other suggestions, other needs? So we're really trying to cultivate more of an open communication, open discussion for these new features as they come out, which is why you'll start to see more features with a beta tag within the app itself. And we'll talk about one of those in just a sec. So our lineup is expanding, which is awesome and exciting. And let's just walk our way down here to make sure we're all set on terms of what is supported by what. So for Android and iOS, obviously we support all the Matterport Pro cameras. On iOS, we support the BLK360, which is a high-end LiDAR sensor that is really used in higher precision, larger scenarios. Right now, Android 1.0 does not support the BLK360. We don't have timing on that yet. Like I had mentioned before, our next priority is making sure we can get scanning with your Android device directly in place, and then the BLK is coming up behind that. If we look at the 360 camera lineup here, we have 3 cameras from Ricoh and 3 from Insta360. So as we walk through this, Android, the current open beta supports all of them. On iOS, the next release, which is in test flight right now, which is 4.1.2, and that's going to be going out to the App Store next week, supports all 6 of them. And the key missing item on iOS is the Theta SC2. And the release that we're going with next week will add that support. So you'll have essentially all 6 supported on both platforms. The Insta360 1R is a modular system. So there are 3 different lens modules that you can have in that camera. We support the 360 module. We don't support the 4K or the 1-inch sensor that are the more traditional action cameras, right? They're not 360 cameras, and so it kind of doesn't make sense for Matterport to not be doing a 360 there. So the 1X2 is the latest slim form factor, kind of pocketable form factor from Insta360. It's got a nice touch display on there that does a preview of your shot. The Insta360 1X is also still available, but more limited quantities. But basically, the 1X2 is obviously the successor to the 1X. So all 3 of those are supported. The Ricoh Theta Z1 is the kind of the highest tier, the best image quality across the 360 cameras, the ones that most folks use often in professional environments. The Ricoh Theta V has been around for quite some time, and that's been like the workhorse for one of the early 360 cameras. It is increasingly out of stock. Obviously, we continue to support these cameras, even if they go end of life from the manufacturer. The Ricoh Theta SC2 is a more affordable version, same image sensor, a little bit slower. It's got a little display on it and comes in 4 colors. So it's the most affordable of the group in terms of the lineup here. And while we're on 360 cameras, there are a lot of other 360 cameras out there. The way this works with Matterport is we try to use what's called the Open Spherical Camera Spec, this OSC spec that was spearheaded by Google back in earlier Google Street View days. And cameras that speak that language, we can talk to. What we found is that we generally need to do custom work with every single 360 camera. It's unfortunately not sufficient that just speaking the OSC spec is good enough. We would love that world to be the case. There are other cameras that do support that protocol, but we found that we have to do additional custom integration work with them. So we're always looking out for what another good set of 360 cameras to work with. And then obviously, in terms of scanning with your handheld device, with your phone, with your tablet. So we've got Matterport for iPhone on iOS, and coming in Q2 will be Android support for smartphone capture, Matterport for Android. And as soon as we have something that's ready for a public beta, we'll make sure everybody knows about that. And that'll be available in the same pattern, the pre-release beta channel on the Android Play Store. While we're here, I see a couple questions coming in here. Let's see. So any plans to support the GoPro Max? So the GoPro is a good example of we would love to support the GoPro devices. Unfortunately, they dropped their developer program back in 2017. And Garmin is another one. The Garmin Verb 360 are a really good, powerful 360 cameras. They don't support the open spherical camera spec. The GoPro folks don't have an SDK either. So there's no way for us, a software development kit, there's no way for us to actually integrate with it. We would literally have to try and hack it. And that's not a really sustainable plan. So, one of the things we've been looking at for a while is, outside of direct connectivity with capture, being able to import 360s taken from other cameras. And as development on that goes forth, and we can get to the point where we can get some public beta experiments out, we'll let everybody know there. A similar question from Tom with the Ricoh Z1. Do we know anything about further next versions? I don't. And frankly, if I did, I probably wouldn't be allowed to say anything, but flat out don't. So, in general, the same deal is going to apply. We'll continue supporting cameras as we go forward. And even if they're discontinued by the manufacturer, we still can support them for some time. So let's move on to our last topic here. Backups and exports and imports of scan jobs. So Amir, if you haven't seen them, Amir has done some awesome videos and articles in terms of how to do this with third-party software like iMazing and iExplorer, cabling your device to a computer and doing full device backups, getting all of that stuff off, or if you have a Mac operating system, doing what is now the equivalent of iTunes Sync to back the complete device up. And obviously the reasons you would do this are, safety, just in case your device gets stolen. Obviously, if you've uploaded stuff to the cloud, then we have that. But if something happens, the device is broken or there's some kind of glitch before you've been able to do that, you don't want data loss. Other folks have been doing that across teams for managing and moving scan jobs to different devices. One of the downsides here, though, is that our data structure inside Capture was never really designed to. It isn't user friendly. It's the job folders, if you've ever looked at these, are alphanumeric, really long alphanumeric strings that in general you don't want to be modifying at all because Capture expects them to be exactly what they are. So one of the exciting things is both versions of Capture now, 4.11, 4.12 on iOS and Android, include the ability to export jobs directly from Capture. And so one of the key reasons why this is a good thing is if you're looking to, okay, hey, I've got an older scan job on this device and I want to move it off. I want to make space on my device, but I want to make sure that I can bring it back if I need to, or I need to transfer it somewhere else, or I want it for safekeeping. One of the reasons why it's better to do an individual scan job backup within Capture and use those features is that there's a subtlety that we're seeing folks are not aware of. If I have job number 1 and I duplicate it, and it's now job number 2, and I continue doing some work on there, and I go and I take the job number 2 folder inside Capture's data structure using these third-party tools, and I copy it off, it will not include some of the data that's involved in that job because we're not duplicating that on iOS to into the new job. We're trying to save space. And so one thing we're seeing in our support tickets is folks that have done these manual backups of just a single job or a couple jobs, and then they try to restore them somewhere else and they're missing data. And this is why, because it's a subtlety that we weren't exposing to everybody. This is generally not true with a whole device backup, because the whole device backup, you're catching all the jobs, and so there's no issue. So basically our best practice recommendation going forward is if you want to export or archive and bring a specific scan job or scan jobs off of Capture, use the facility within the application. And that will make sure that if I go off and I say, okay, I'm going to archive or export a particular job, it will go look for all the data that it needs to get, and it will collect all that together. It's going to make a zip file for you, and it's going to give you the friendly name of the job. So you're not going to see something like, F4E9E whatever. Inside that zip file, you will see those folders. And it's a bad idea to edit those folders, because if you do so and you bring it back, then Capture is going to not understand, most likely, what's going on, because those are not meant to be edited. For full device backups, Amir's videos up on Matterport Academy are awesome. Most of the time, the most efficient thing to do is use those third-party tools to say, okay, great, I'm going to take the entire jobs folder and pull it off, or I'm doing an entire device backup there. So this is an example of what you'll see in the current beta feature for 4.1.2. And if you go into the help and support menu within Capture, down at the bottom below the repair option, you're going to see export jobs. And when you tap on this, you'll be given a list of the jobs that you currently have on Capture on that device. And let's say I'm going to go export this Theta Z1 pool shot, and I'll select it. And then Capture is going to go off and crunch and make sure it's got all the data. It's going to slap that together into a zip archive, and so you'll have one single folder. And then it's going to prompt you with the standard iOS share screen. And so you can do a couple things here. You could save it locally to a different folder on that device, depending on the applications that you have installed. Like in this particular instance, I have Google Drive and Dropbox installed. And so I can then go ahead and choose to upload this to my Google Drive folder. And, obviously these jobs tend to be fairly big, but in this case, I want to have it up in the cloud in my own personal space. And so I'll do that here. On iOS and on Android, both of the modern versions of everything have the equivalent of AirDrop. On Android, it's called Nearby, and you can select it and you could essentially send it over to another device. So this is super convenient if you're just saying, look, I want to get this onto my computer. I just want to get in a different spot. So here I could easily just hit AirDrop, boom, sends it over to the computer, and it's all set. Then if you're doing something to make space after you've archived this and you've sent it off somewhere else, then you go back into Capture and you say, okay, now this old model from 2019, now within Capture, I'm going to delete that model. That will also make sure that the deletion of that model is cleaned up properly. And so now you'll have an archive of that model in a zip file off somewhere else, and then you've cleaned up your device locally. On iOS, we don't have the import back path within Capture yet. That's coming soon. The method that Amir outlines in the Matterport Academy videos will work. You unzip that file. It's got the job folders. You copy those job folders back over to the job directory on your device, and reboot, and you should be good to go. But in the next version of Capture, you shouldn't even need to do that, and we'll have the import facility. And I'll show you that on Android in the next slide. So on Android, similarly, you go into the help and support menu, and the export job flow is very similar, almost identical with slight differences due to just Androidness. One thing is, before we get into the flow, I'll call out that you see create backup and restore from backup here on Android. And this is something we were experimenting with too, which is to basically say, take my entire jobs folder and make a zip archive of this thing and then send it out. So this is convenient if you're trying to take a snapshot of the whole folder. There is one downside, which is if you have a lot of jobs, then, I've already used 30 gigabytes of data in my jobs folder, and now I need at least another 30, to store a copy of that we're going to compress and then move off device. So it is fine for when you've got smaller sets of jobs. If your device is getting really, really full, then you won't be able to do a full backup in this manner. And the method that Amir has done on the Matterport Academy videos is the preferred one, is to hook up to a third party, cable your device to a laptop or computer and do the third party tools to pull all of that stuff off. But for import, and this is a preview of what you'll see on iOS too, with some slightly different UI. This is early beta kinds of stuff. Basically, you can say, okay, great. In the previous world, I had exported my model and I took it in a zip file and I stuck it off onto a computer. Maybe I got a new device. Maybe later on I decide I need to work with that again. So in this case on Android, you can pull that zip file into the directory that you see over here on the lower right, into the Matterport directory in your documents folder, and there's an archive folder. If you pull that in, when you tap on import jobs inside Capture, it will give you a list of archives that it sees in that directory. And you can then select that and say, okay, great, I'm going to go ahead and import this. And then a Capture will unpack that, bring it back in, and when you go back into your directory of your jobs, you'll see it there. And so again, this is what we're trying to do here is give you a more user-friendly way to go through these operations that you're normally going through, give you ways that are a little bit more reliable to make space on your device, get archives of your stuff, keep it in the safe spot. One of the things that will be coming in the future is cloud restore, where you'd be able to say, I'm going to do this, but I want to be able to, just bring things back from the cloud because that data is up there already. We have to do a bunch more work in terms of data structures and all this other stuff because the current model that we have is not super conducive to making that work as well.
Yeah, that was great. That was a lot of stuff, but super informative and very, very useful information. We've got some more questions that we'll get to in just a bit. Just wanted to kind of go through a couple things, so you guys can find the information that you want after we say goodbye today. If you go to matterport.com and check out the resources tab, the first thing there is support. That'll get you to kind of the support hub, which, basically is the hub for everything support related. So, frequently asked questions, link to the help center, which has hundreds and hundreds of articles all about backing up and the cameras we support and all this stuff that we're talking about here today. If you are in the US or I guess Canada as well, maybe even Mexico, the phone number to reach support is 408-805-3347. But regardless of where you are, if you go to that support page and scroll all the way down to the bottom, the correct phone number for your location will be displayed. So you can reach us by phone. You can contact us by emailing support@matterport.com. And if you go again back to that support page, there's a little kind of help bubble in the bottom right corner of the screen where you can chat with support. So we try and make it as easy as possible to reach support, but these are the ways to reach support. As always, I have to mention that it's super, super important that your contact information in your profile is up to date. We send not only newsletters and things like that, but we also sometimes send emails that are specific to your account. Those get sent to the email address that is associated with your account, and you will not get them unless that information is up to date. So please do make sure that is relevant. And finally, to stay connected with everything, we're very active on Facebook. If you go to facebook.com/Matterport, you get to our Facebook page where we post, all the latest and greatest. Every time a beta makes it out into GA, then it's posted there, so you'll know about it. as well as if you've got these, cool spaces that you've been scanning and you'd like to kind of show it off in the Matterport gallery, this is where you go to get that done. go.matterport.com/nominate-your-space and just let us know what space it is you'd like to add in there, and we'll have a look and check it out. And with that, I think we are, that's the end of the presentation. So thanks, like Kirk said, a lot of information, but we do have some time left for Q&A. I'm just gonna go ahead and stop sharing. Yeah, so there was a question regarding how to handle rooms with mirrors when you're standing with the iPhone. Great question. So we're, huge advocates of using the right tool for the right job. And if you walk through the property and you see that, this room has a ton of mirrors in it, and you would not really be able to capture it, from just one location. You need a few more scan positions and what have you. You come to the realization that it's not going to be possible to have a scan position without you in it if you use the iPhone, in which case something like a 360 camera for those areas probably would be a better tool, because you can it's like a little small stick, much more inconspicuous than even the Pro 2, and you can kind of walk around the corner and trigger it. So using the right tool for the right job is super important. That's why we have so many cameras that we support.
There are a couple from the export topic I was going to hit just to
please.
Can I edit the scans on my computer? So I export a job and I go off and I edit the files and modify them on the computer. Not a good idea. So capture isn't designed to expect and have somebody editing those things. And in general, they're not really designed to be user friendly. The imaging and depth components are not things that you'd pull up in Photoshop to edit. The file structure and all the raw data around that is really not meant to be user editable for the raw jobs themselves. So sorry, but that's probably not a great idea. There's a question around, so if you bring an exported job back to your device, yes, you can add scans to it, you could edit, mark it up, you could upload it again to the Matterport cloud. No problems at all. That's part of what this was designed to do, is to make it easy to bring that back if you need to.
Alex asked, I missed something about local rendering of the capture, something about updating the app, and is that automatic? So did you cover anything about local? I don't think we do anything like that. I'm not sure what he's referring to. I'm
not sure about the question, but in general, let's for everybody, both app stores, iOS and Android App Store, are generally set to auto update. So the application will generally update itself. You can turn this off if you decide you want more control over that. And if, Alex, you're referring to what we're doing on Android, where the Cortex engine is now part of the application itself, that's a convenience for everybody, just so that you don't have this separate download. And so basically just on Android, it's coming as part of the application, and this will be coming to iOS as well. So that was just a convenience to make it easier and more streamlined as you get started.
If we use the iPhone LiDAR on outside scans, and Pro 2 inside, does that mean that we cannot do Matterpack or floor plans, or can we separate somehow? So you would have to separate them, yes. I would always lean towards starting inside, just to get a good solid foundation. If you've got the Pro 2, start with that. Once you've done the entire inside, create a duplicate of that model in Capture, and then you can continue your way outside with something like the iPhone with LiDAR, because the iPhone's LiDAR is better suited for outdoors. Doesn't conflict with the sun's infrared. Then you have both models, one, the complete that you can show off, and then the other one that you can use for ordering floor plans. Because even if a single scan position was captured using a phone or a 360 camera at this time, that will basically mean that you will not be able to use that model to order floor plans or Matterpacks and things like that.
There were a couple of iPhone-related questions here. So one question is around whether there's mounts or motorized mounts for rotation. And in general, this is related to what I was talking about before in terms of when you're scanning with your iPhone, A monopod is a handy mechanism to keep you centered, or keep the phone centered rather, as you go through that. There are motor mounts, there are actual mounts and motor mounts that folks could use to rotate their cameras around that. There's no known motor mount right now that Capture could control to basically say, mount my iPhone on this and then have it do a rotation. There's a couple other providers like Inside Maps that do things like that, where there's a motor mount for your iPhone, and they're taking the pano imagery as well. For larger spaces, that kind of a mechanism would certainly be handy. And that's, an area that we keep looking at in terms of, are other parties going to be providing those kinds of things, or is that something that we should look at providing? As we get a sense of what are the kinds of spaces that folks are capturing with their iPhone, what's the size, how large are they? Is this a repeated kind of thing versus more one-off? We'll try and evaluate, and I'm sure this world will evolve to make more convenient things like that available.
Question from Greg. When shooting exterior 360 captures with a 360 camera, are there any options for a timer or way to shoot one lens at a time? Definitely something that I know, Kirk, you've mentioned in the past that we're looking into, so you can kind of shoot the one hemisphere, walk around to the opposite side, shoot the opposite hemisphere, and then stitch those together. So great question. Any progress?
Unfortunately, that is still in the queue. So for the broader picture, when you're with a 360 camera, if you can't hide, there's nowhere to hide, unless you're really small and you go right beneath the tripod, which is probably unsafe. So the notion here is that the Ricoh Theta cameras have a plug-in architecture, and there's a bunch of apps that folks have done, with timers and things like that. What we would like to try to do is bring the ability to do that with all the 360 cameras. So what Amir was talking about was shoot one side, then walk around the other side, shoot the other side, remove the operator, or remove everything that's changed in between. That's still in our queue behind other features that we're working on, so I don't have any update for you. I know that's not super satisfying, but that's where we are. We know that's important. Related questions: what range will LiDAR work outside? So for iPhone 12 Pro and Pro Max, Apple advertises 5 meters. One thing we've seen outside in full sun and so forth. Again, the frequency of the LiDAR and the nature of it's less susceptible to near infrared, unlike the Pro 2 cameras with the structured light sensors. Note that the data density will get pretty sparse out there. So even though it technically goes out that far, your data density and the accuracy of that's starting to get kind of spotty. So in general, recommend tightening up your scans a little bit. If it's really important to get 3D data outdoors in that area, I would try to go a little bit denser. If you're trying to do a really large space, and I think part of this question is, can I do large spaces with this? You can try to push the distance as much as you can, but if you start to see misalignments where the puck and the mini map are looking to land in the wrong spot on the mini map, then that's where things are starting to get all dicey. You have to start not moving so far between scans.
Yeah, we had a question from Edwin who asked, how can one enhance the quality, saturation, color, curves, levels, things like that, of a space post-shoot? So that is unfortunately something that Matterport doesn't yet offer. However, there are third-party tools, namely somebody like MP Embed. So if you go to mpembed.com, you can, I think even their free tool offers that level of enhancement. So really, really wonderful tool, and nice that we kind of are working a lot on our SDKs and APIs in order to make that kind of stuff more possible.
2 related questions from Richard, and this relates to the number of images and number of scans on Capture, and he was relaying that he was using a Theta V and getting up around 700 to 900 scans with the iPad crashing. So this is an important area, and this is related to that RAM topic I was talking to before. So the full answer around what are the limits is it depends, and it depends on a couple things. So the iOS, or the device that you're using, the capabilities of it, how modern is it in terms of an iPad or Android device? Obviously, storage is important just because, hey, I need to store this stuff somewhere. The most subtle thing, and the thing that's usually the killer, is how much RAM is on a device. And that's the thing that is not well advertised, and it's subtle. And it also depends on what camera you're using. So the limitations, the size limitations, interestingly, you can go further with a Pro camera than you can with the 360 cameras, simply because we're doing more computational stuff with the 360 cameras than we are with the Pro cameras. So I'm assuming Richard probably had a fairly modern iPad, because where he's seeing these crashes up at around 700 and 900 is to me, what I know of the limits right now is saying, yeah, that's probably where you're going to start hitting those problems on a really modern iPad device. The lower tier devices, that effective limit will come down. And so, like, you might, on an old 2 gig RAM device with 360 cameras, you may only get 200 scans before you start crashing. So one of the things we're going to try and do is publish guidelines around this to say, okay, here's the effective limits in terms of where you're going to run into trouble. Because once you crash, obviously that's terrible. And once you're in that state, the next thing to do is to start another scan job that overlaps the prior one, and then submit that to support for stitching. So more to come there in terms of guidance and limitations. Just remember, rule of thumb, if you're shopping for a new device that you're going to use, try to maximize the RAM as much as possible. So it saves you time, it saves you hassle operationally, so it's worth it.
Ellie asks, if I'm unsatisfied with the quality of my Matterport scan, can I recapture some scans and then upload that and have that kind of be incorporated into the scan? So it's not that the new scans are going to be incorporated. But let me back up a second. Yes, you can go back to the site. You can capture new scans into the same model. You can make a duplicate of that model in Capture, erase a couple scans, and recapture that area, for example. This happens a lot if somebody just renovated a kitchen. You don't want to rescan the entire house. You just go back, erase the scan positions around the kitchen, start from a familiar area, someplace that the system can identify as having not changed since the previous scans, and then kind of scan your way into that new area that has been changed. You should not have a problem. However, when you upload, it's not going to replace the scan or the model that has previously been processed. The way it works is kind of like baking a cake. If you've heard me talk about this, I'll say it one more time. You've got your raw ingredients in Capture. You put those raw ingredients, your eggs and flours and whatnot and milk, and you throw that into the oven and it gets processed into a cake. At that point, you can throw icing on that cake in the form of matter tags and highlight reels, but you can't change the ingredients that are in that baked cake. What you can do is alter your raw ingredients and bake a new cake. So that's how that works. You will end up with a new model. It'll have a new and different link. So if you are sharing this and have previously published this link, that's going to be new, and those links will have to be updated. Let's see, we got time for one or two more, about a minute short of the hour.
Yeah, there's a couple have asked a couple questions similarly asking about the capture range for the Theta SC2 or differences between the 360 cameras in terms of range and so forth, and accuracy. So in general, the range. So there's two ranges, right? There's the range of what am I capturing in depth data, what kind of depth data is being synthesized from that image. Like if I capture out in a really large space, one thing to watch is Cortex will try to generate depth data from a lot of stuff, and so you might get you can get a very large range from that. But the question is that data really useful or accurate for you? So again, if you're in a large space, try to increase your scan density. If you're talking about the Wi-Fi range, the 360 cameras sometimes have not the strongest Wi-Fi signal. So sometimes you'll notice, like if you're in spaces when I'm scanning, if I'm a little bit further from the camera, sometimes I have to stick my iPad just out behind the corner to get a little bit of a boost to get that thing to trigger. So if that's the question, it's similar to all the other 360 cameras. It's kind of par for the course with them. There's nothing particularly different about the SC2 as far as I'm aware.
Yeah, and last question came from Jay. asked the floor plan accuracy I should expect from the Ricoh Theta Z1. So the Z1 being kind of the top of the line 360 that we're currently supporting with the massive CMOS sensor. Just because it has better image quality and good signal to noise ratio, unfortunately, does not translate to a more accurate floor plan. In fact, right now we're still not supporting floor plans. When a 360 camera is used to capture that image. So you are looking at accuracy of within 4 to 8%. It just kind of depends a little bit. So we feel like we have a little bit more work to do to bring that down before we'll be comfortable with floor plans, because those generally need to follow a standards called RICS standard. So to get there, a little bit more work has to be done, but we're on our way. Okay, with that, I think we will we'll say goodbye. Thank you so much, Kirk. That was absolutely amazing. A lot of really great information. Can't wait for more stuff like that to come out and see that progressing.
That's cool. Thank you. And thanks for all the questions, everybody. This is great. Lots of good info.
Yeah. Great questions. Really appreciate the participation and you attending today. So thanks very much. And with that, have a great rest of the day. Take care, everybody.
Bye, everybody.